Good evening. Welcome to the big question on NDTV Profit. I'm Vikram Oza, and tonight, India is making this quiet, but could be historic. It's a shift in how we plan our power for the future. For over 6 decades, nuclear energy in India has been this government-only domain, from mining and fuel to reactors and nuclear waste, all of it government-controlled. Private players were kept firmly outside that gate. But now it is changing, because now we have the Shanti Bill of 2025. It has been cleared by the Union Cabinet. Shanti stands for Sustainable Harnessing and Advancement of Nuclear Energy for Transforming India. That is the Shanti Bill. It opens the nuclear energy space to private companies and joint ventures. It allows private players to participate across the nuclear value chain, from atomic minerals exploration and equipment manufacturing to fuel fabrication to R&D and potentially plant operations. But don't take this as an evacuation of government control. It's far from that. In fact, the government is keeping a tight grip on the strategic core. Uranium and thorium, those will always belong to the center. Remember, uranium and thorium are strategic nuclear materials. They are not just fuels for electricity. They can also be used in nuclear weapons programs. So there has to be full traceability of every gram that is mined and processed or imported. Hence, you have government control. Also, fuel enrichment, the spent fuel, the nuclear waste, all of them remain under government control, which effectively means that private firms may generate the power, but the government is keeping the keys to the nuclear fuel and the waste. And then, of course, the question of tariffs. Tariffs for nuclear power, for civilian use, those too will rest with the center, not the market regulators. So overall, the promise is quite big. Here we are talking about cleaner baseload power. From nuclear power, it is definitely going to be cleaner. Also, support for India's Net Zero 2070 goal, which is the real goal that India is hankering for, and a pathway really to scale nuclear capacity. From under 9 gigawatts where it stands today, we are trying to push it up to 100 gigawatts by the year 2047. Something that government cannot fund by itself. It needs the participation of the private sector. And what is the gateway? Small modular reactors, they are considered the gateways, SMRs. Cheaper, definitely factory built, they are faster to deploy, and they are ideal for industrial clusters and data centers. They have a 20,000 crore rupee government push already on the table, but how much further can that agenda be pushed? The fine print itself raises some questions. It's about private operators carrying liability. Though it is capped, private operators, they do carry liability, but indeed, there is a capping over there. Licenses can be cancelled by the government on safety grounds, security grounds, and if a project is abandoned, the government can step in without taking on any of the debt. That's all part of the consideration in the Shanti Bill. So tonight, we're asking the question that matters most to consumers and industry alike. Now that India is opening up its nuclear power sector, can private players really cut up our bills? Is this the reform that finally unlocks clean, reliable, base-load power? Or do the risks and controls limit what private capital can really deliver? That's the big question we're asking. Let's get into the debate with our panelists. But before we get down to our panelists, just let's listen in to what the government stance on this is. And we've heard from the Union Commerce Minister. He's spoken about the Shanti Bill and how they're getting the private sector to get involved.
पार्लियामेंट के समक्ष शांति बिल लाया गया है जो न्यूक्लियर एनर्जी में भारत को नई ऊंचाइयों पे लेके जाएगा, प्राइवेट प्लेयर्स को भी एनकरेज करेगा, पब्लिक प्राइवेट पार्टनरशिप भी एनकरेज करेगा और साथ ही साथ आगे चल के स्मॉल मॉड्यूलर रिएक्टर्स एसएमआरस देश में बड़े पैमाने पे लग सके, जिससे एक तो कभी पावर कट की समस्या ना हो, दूसरा रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी को और बल मिले कि सोलर एंड विंड अकेले 24 घंटे बिजली नहीं दे सकती है, न्यूक्लियर एक ऐसा है जो पीक आवर्स में भी आपको पर्याप्त बिजली दे सकता है। तो सोलर विंड न्यूक्लियर कॉम्बिनेशन हो जाए तो 24 घंटे आपको नवीकरणीय ऊर्जा, साफ ऊर्जा मिल सकती है। और साथ ही साथ डेटा सेंटर्स, जिसको हम बड़े पैमाने पे प्रमोट करना चाह रहे हैं और जो रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी भी चाहते हैं, रिलायबल पावर भी चाहते हैं, उसमें भी न्यूक्लियर पावर का बहुत बड़ा रोल रहेगा।
So as India is moving towards its Viksit Bharat dreams, how important is this to unpack what the Shanti Bill brings to the table by way of opening up the nuclear power sector for private players? Let's discuss this with our panel. Joining us tonight is Prasenjit Pal. He's independent consultant and former executive director at NTPC. Good to have you, sir. Professor Prabhat Ranjan is also with us, nuclear fusion scientist. He's co-founder of ASPL Fusion. And joining us is our very own Pallav Bagla, science editor at NDTV. Great to have you, Pallav. And gentlemen, let me begin by asking Mr. Pal. Mr. Pal, from your understanding, how important was it for the government to open up the nuclear power sector to private players at this stage? Clearly, it seems like the government couldn't do it alone, and pressing the accelerator on nuclear power for diversification of our energy needs seems to be the need of the hour.
Exactly. We have a national plan to go in for 100 gigawatt nuclear. And if you look at the track record of what we have been able to achieve till date, it obviously calls for a massive acceleration and scaling up. Now, this massive acceleration and scaling up would need multiple agencies to step in and do the work. And while we rope in multiple agencies, why not the private sector? Because the private sector inherently seems to have a better efficiency in terms of the financials and the commercials and project execution track records. So the idea was that let everybody join hands and try to meet the 100 gigawatt national target.
The target is 100 gigawatts, like Mr. Pal is pointing out. Professor, in your understanding, how quickly can we get there? Because the urgency is in the way that we are opening it up at this stage. And, of course, the diversification needs, they don't need to be underlined, but they have been there. So when we are doing this catch-up, where do we stand and how quickly are we able to get there?
So my field is some nuclear fusion. And I wanted to make it a point that most of the talk about nuclear is only focused on fission part.
Right.
And we are kind of forgetting the fusion part.
Right.
We need to have both of them in the picture. And right now, unlike in past, we are very close to realizing power based on nuclear fusion. I think the earliest we're expecting is 2028, which is not very far away. So I think if we use combination of both, it will be very useful, both for power production as well as nuclear fusion can support fission, fuel, and many other things like waste management and so on. So I would say that this bill, I'm not sure fusion word is mentioned anywhere, but if we can do that, probably definitely we can achieve by 2047 what we are targeting. But we must work together, fusion and fission together.
Pallav Bagla, you've tracked this entire sector very closely for decades. Tell us how much of a move away from what we had is the point that Shanti Bill is arriving at?
Well, it is certainly a break from the past. We've lived with government control and nuclear reactors being part of the Department of Atomic Energy and Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. Now that the sector is being opened up, this highly secretive sector will now be open to private sector for making nuclear plants. But there are controls, plenty of controls. All the nuclear material will always belong to the government of India, which is the central government. The Atomic Energy Regulatory Board continues to remain in that same position as it was, reporting to the Atomic Energy Commission. So it's not become autonomous as people were expecting it to be. But the big question is, for generating 100 gigawatts of nuclear power, where will India get its uranium? I spoke to Dr. Anil Kakodkar a while ago, and he said if India has to ramp up to 100 gigawatts, we would be using more than half the world's uranium resources. So that would be the big stumbling block. And whether private sector would really come out and make nuclear plants is something we'll have to wait and watch. Nuclear is like a tiger by the tail, 5 years to make the reactor, 60 years to run it, and another 30, 40 years to keep maintaining it after it has stopped generating power. Which private player has that kind of staying power other than Adani's, Ambani's, and Tata's? Many people feel the startups are going to do it. I don't think there are any startups which have the capacity for staying power like that, and nor the government do it. But at the same time, liability issues. There is a very interesting way in this bill has taken care of the liability, because that was what became the stumbling block when we were trying to import reactors from America and France. That has been taken care of, saying that right to recourse will be only when it's in the contract.
Correct.
So right now the government will going to retain that whether it will have it or not. So let's see. Abhi Delhi dur hai, and we'll have to wait and watch how it pans out.
So my second question, yes.
But at least a door has been opened.
The door has been opened, but getting there, you're saying Delhi abhi dur hai. It will take some time. The targets have been set, but Mr. Pallav Bagla is bringing up a very important subject about private players and how they would be interested in participating in the government's plan as per the Shanti Bill. How attractive would it look for them? They are looking for certainty in terms of the kind of imports that are required, the kind of tariffs that are going to be fixed, and those will be fixed by the government. Licenses are cancelable. Is nuclear power truly investable to you as per the Shanti Bill?
The Shanti Bill actually does bring in a lot of concepts which make it very attractive. For instance, there's a capped nuclear liability, there's a government backstop, there's an independent regulator, although Bagla pointed out is not exactly 100% independent, but still to a large extent independent, and of course very clear licensing policy and safety regime. Essentially, substantial number of technologies are available on the table right now internationally. We have the pressurized heavy water reactor, which is the domestic workhorse, and we have PWRs, which are being supplied by Russia, France, USA, and Korea across the world. And these are all proven technologies. So any private entity coming in could go in for a massive global tendering process and try to get in the best kind of technology at the least possible price. So that would tend to, reduce the overall capex layout for a project. But yes, you are right. The price would be decided by the government, but still there would be a appellate arrangement, and I'm sure the government would also be looking to optimize on the overall costs and see that the power is saleable. Right now, though, if you look at the international price levels, unless we are able to really bring in a lot of economy of scale, which means a large number of reactors brought in through some sort of a chain process or a continuous process with standardized design,
yes,
we may not be able to achieve the cost optimizations. So that would be an area which any entity coming into nuclear business needs to look into. So some sort of bulk tendering, some sort of large volume standardization would have to be targeted across the board to achieve the kind of pricing and the kind of tariffs that we would, that would be saleable on the Indian market.
So how much of it is already with us by way of technology, by way of the infrastructure to set up these is what I want to ask Professor Prabhat Ranjan as well. Professor, in your understanding, where are we at in terms of being able to generate nuclear power? And at the scale at which we are talking about, a lot of people are talking about the gateway being the SMRs, the small modular reactors. Are they truly the gateway? Is that the way to approach this?
So right now, SMRs are being talked about heavily in Indian context and worldwide also. But very few proven systems are there right now. Some of the closed group discussion I've had, atomic energy people themselves have little doubts about SMR being a solution. But what we need to say that SMR should not, again, I would like to emphasize this point, SMR should not only be thought from fission point of view. The modular reactors can be built using fusion process as well. So my humble request is to audience is to enlarge this discussion. Most of the talk is only about fission-based systems, whether it is of radioactive waste and other things, which do not affect the fusion system. So SMRs right now have an issue of cost. There is also an issue of exclusion zone requirement, which Atomic Energy Regulatory Board has to look into this because the requirements may not be as much as for a large reactor. At the same time, something like a nuclear fusion device does not require any of these things. It's a much safer system. So we need to combine enlarge the definition of SMR to also include other possible technologies.
So the safeguards and the guardrails, Pallav Bagla, how much of that has there already been built into the Shanti Bill? Because that's where the government would be most concerned with all the kind of approvals that are required, even from international agencies, for this kind of expansion of India's nuclear power for civilian use. How are we going to assure the world that whatever we do in terms of this expansion is going to be safe?
One of the biggest guardrails and one of the biggest issues for the private sector has been very squarely addressed in the bill when the government has said that the fuel will belong to the government and the spent fuel, which is the waste, will also go back to the government. So the private sector does not need to worry about how it will take care of the spent fuel, because that is one big headache in nuclear power. And that also gives the guardrail for international agencies to be sure that India's nuclear program remains, the nuclear energy component remains within safeguards of the International Atomic Energy Agency. We have a bunch of reactors which are outside the safeguards of IAEA, which are meant for our weapons program. They will continue to remain there. But the bulk of the 100 gigawatt reactors which we want to ramp up would be in the civilian domain. And there are plenty of safeguards there. And the government is, when it's willing to take care of the fuel, I think that should also give solace to the private sector, because when I was speaking to people in the private sector, that was their biggest worry as to what would they do with the fuel. Now, if the government is taking it back with them, it is the same situation like we have today, because the Nuclear Power Corporation of India does not own the uranium, does not own the spent fuel. It remains with the Department of Atomic Energy. But the big thing would be, where will you get all that uranium from in the world? India is woefully short of domestic uranium, and where will we get? And all the mining activities, Vikram, I should say, the bill clearly says, will rest with the government. So the mining is not being handed over to the private sector. So if people want to set up private captive mines across, say, Niger or other parts of the world in Australia or Canada, that is unlikely to be permitted in this bill. So we have many small issues lingering in the bill. But ultimately, we have to see whether the parliament passes it, because it has to be debated in both houses of the parliament. And the opposition today opposed the entry of the bill.
Correct.
And last time the liability bill was opposed by the same people who have brought the changes in the liability. So the world is coming in full circle, and it's fascinating to see. We lost almost a decade, and I'm sure Prasenjit Saab would have already set up a couple of reactors with NTPC
in the last decade.
Within the decade. And I'm sure we'd hear from Mr. Paul setting up reactors very soon in his new capacity.
Which is why I'm asking Mr. Pal, how quickly can these reactors be set up? Right now, we are talking about all these challenges, and for private players to get in, how much of these are going to be seen as real challenges? Whether you're talking about uranium imports, the kind of guardrails that Pallav Bagla very correctly pointed out, some of these costs are going to be borne by the government. The waste is going to be taken care by the government. So even when it comes to the tariffs, which the government is going to decide, because there are certain costs that have to be built into the tariffs. So will the tariffs really come down if private players get into this sector?
Answering that question very simply in two parts. One is that a typical nuclear plant would take 5.5 years from the first pour of concrete. Okay, but the first pour of concrete happens after the land has been acquired and the design has been frozen and the regulatory board gives you the design clearance to go ahead. So which includes the siting clearance, the excavation clearance, and then the clearance for first pour of concrete. So all these things would have to be given by the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, and after due diligence and due consideration of all safety aspects of the project before doing that. So that's number one. So therefore, there would be a time, definitely much more than 5.5 years. 5.5 years is from first pour of concrete to first achieving of criticality of the unit. Now, in terms of cost, as I said, the pressurized heavy water reactors, the current workhorse of the country, seems to be techno-economically the most suitable one to multiply right now. And the international pricing, if we look at, we will definitely have to push for economy of scales through large bids of multiple reactors to be able to really drive any sort of price optimizations over there. Otherwise, the present indication is that with international technology, the prices may be slightly more than coal parity. So that is a concern, which of course one has to see how the industry, how the scenario plays out, and how we are able to sort of harness the economic power of bulk tenders through standardized design and very large contracts for multiple reactors. So I think that would be the way to go to sort of optimize the cost.
Right. Pallav, you were saying?
Yeah, see, we already have 10 nuclear power plants of 700 megawatt coming in conveyor belt mode
Correct.
by the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, which have been cleared by the government of India. Two of them are working, one is in advanced stage, 7 are coming up. And after that, another 10 are being made by likely to be made by the Nuclear Power Corporation of India. Again, 700 megawatt pressurized heavy water reactors with imported fuel. But the big question would be whether India can ramp up and get light water reactors, which is 1200 megawatt reactors from Rosatom, which is Russia, get Westinghouse reactors, and also get the EDF reactors, which is the 600 megawatt reactors from France. Now, those would be the real game changers. There's a lot of hype around these small and modular reactors. The cost of small and modular reactors per megawatt, I'm told, is about 5 or 6 times more. And whether they are suitable for India, I'm told by experts, certainly not, because we have a lot of land and we can put up large reactors, which gives you economies of scale. So small reactors, very fashionable, the current trend, but I don't think India is going to embrace them. And even when the President Vladimir Putin was there, small modular reactors did not feature in the discussion by India, in the outcome at least. So while the Russians are pushing very hard for India to buy the SMR from Russia, but I don't think India is likely to buy them just now because they are 5 to 6 times more costly.
Right.
But at the same time, see, in the fuel cycle, in the spent fuel cycle, see, India looks at spent fuel as not as waste, but as a resource, because we do what is called a closed fuel cycle. We use the fuel to generate more fuel in the fast breeder reactor. So we have a very ambitious program of using the waste fuel and closing the loop. So that would add a lot of value. And when imported uranium comes, we'd be able to ramp that up in our prototype fast breeder reactor. That is another area which is very interesting, alongside Professor Prabhat Ranjan's fusion energy projects, which can be a game changer when they come.
So then, of course, they would have to work in tandem, like we said. But to understand what we're trying to achieve on our net zero emissions, which is something else, why we need to push the pedal on this furiously, Professor, how much of that energy mix is going to change once nuclear power does come mainstream? How much of that ambition to become net zero are we going to get closer to now that we've got the Shanti Bill?
So I would just like to address Dr. Bagla, what he mentioned. One was that let's also look at fusion in this picture. Both we have been talking about supply of uranium. Probably we have the largest reserve of thorium in the world. Using fusion process, we can produce uranium. We don't need to import any uranium from anywhere. That's one point. Second, in the same the cycle of waste fuel, fusion can play a much important role than so far it has been imagined. And so if we consider this, definitely by 2050 we are supposed to triple the nuclear energy, and 2070 net zero we should be able to achieve. But you must keep a holistic picture of nuclear fusion and fission together. I think the costs In fact, the issue of shutting down the nuclear power plants, taking long time and running it for a long time, all that issue goes away with fusion systems. So my guess is that by 2035, we're expecting to see multiple nuclear fusion power plants across the world, maybe about 400 megawatt range. And by 2047, we should see a good percentage of nuclear power plants running on fusion-based systems. So definitely by 2070, it should be possible to achieve net zero.
Mr. Pal, in passing, now that we've got the Shanti Bill, it is going to be debated in Parliament. But if you look at the overall picture, the idea is to get private sector involvement in what was safeguarded by the government. But what could be a deal breaker for the private sector right now? If you had to point out one or two reasons which they might see as a stumbling block to get involved in India's nuclear power ambitions, what would those be?
I think the primary stumbling block would be the cost of technology, because if the private sector were to go in for international competitive bidding, and if we are not able to sort of achieve the scale because we have multiple entities going in for few reactors, so the tendering process may not achieve the kind of economics that we are looking at. So that perhaps could be a stumbling block. Other than that, the regulatory process requiring various kinds of approvals, they need to be obviously streamlined, and power purchase agreement would necessarily have to be facilitated by the government mechanism. I believe that is already provided for in the bill. And unless these minimum things are facilitated, and some sort of fuel security, naturally everybody is looking for fuel security. In my opinion and view, I thought that in case we are going for international competitive bidding for international technology, we must also parallelly tie up with international fuel suppliers to stockpile at least initial 10 years of fuel in the country. And that should be a part of the overall tendering process. Or some sort of a fuel security mechanism needs to be worked out so that the private sector has assurance that A, there will be power purchase agreement, B, there would be fuel availability, and C, the project can be completed in a time-bound manner. I think the private sector would be looking at these three basic inputs to enable them to decide to go ahead.
So taking away from what all three gentlemen are saying, clearly this is not just about opening up a sector, it's about how much control the government keeps, how much risk private players are willing to take, and whether consumers are ultimately going to benefit or not. The Shanti Bill promises scale. There is clean baseload power and a faster path to net zero, but it also raises tough questions around costs, around safety and accountability, and of course trust, because nuclear power is that kind of sector. Whether private players can truly power India's nuclear leap and cut our power bills is going to depend not just on policy intent, but on execution, as it always does. My thanks to a great panel joining us, Prasenjit Pal, Professor Prabhat Ranjan, Pallav Bagla. Thank you very much for your insights on the big question tonight. Indeed, of course, this is going to raise several questions, and the debate is going to play out in the Lok Sabha as well. We'll be watching out for what comes out of it eventually once this bill becomes law. But the sector is very promising, and what it brings to the table is what all Indians are looking forward to. Thanks indeed for joining us. I'm Vikram Oza from the entire team. Thank you for joining us.